Grace and peace. I am Pastor Wallace C. Baxter III, pastor of Second Baptist Church Southwest in District Heights, Maryland, and grateful to be a part of this one-day session for the Baptist Convention of DC and Vicinity. It is a great day. We've had a great day today. Our guest preacher preached a mighty word during the ministers' conference today, and we certainly are grateful for the partnership with the Missionary Baptist Ministers Conference of DC and Vicinity. And so on behalf of our president, Pastor Keith William Byrd Sr., I do welcome you to this evening session of this one-day session and this conversation, this town hall of sorts, with our guest for the day, the Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois. He is a great preacher. If you missed him earlier today, then you certainly missed a treat. But he is also a gifted intellectual and a gifted mind and a gifted pastor and just someone who has passion for God's people. And so we welcome you, Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois III. In this setting, we welcome you tonight to have this conversation. God bless you for being here.
It's my joy to be here, man. It's been a good day in DC, so I'm excited about our conversation, bro.
Good. And one of the things about your message earlier today, was that you mentioned something that struck a chord with me. You said that the Black church is supposed to be telling our story, and so I want you to kind of talk about what you mean by storytelling, how significant that is for us as Black people, as the Black church.
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. One is that, like, taking Jesus' pedagogy seriously, you'll be remembered that Jesus himself is a griot, right? The West African figure who keeps, tells, and performs the stories of a people. Jesus teaches through stories, which I think helps us to understand the power of narrative theology, right? The power of allowing our theology to flow from our stories, right? Our stories of resilience, our stories of sorrow, our stories of great triumph, and also our stories of stagnation and regression. All of these stories help to tell a fuller story about who God is, but it also allows us to read, and what I was trying to say in the sermon is that I think faith communities, particularly Black churches, are the place where we get to learn a new story about ourselves, right? The American story has consistently written chapters about Black life as undeserving, Black life as excludable, Black life as sort of an appendix to America and not really America itself. And it has always been Black faith folk who have done what Dr. King would say is to embrace and tell a story of our somebodyness, right? Even think about this. The Black churches don't start in beautiful buildings like Zion. Black churches start in the clearings of the woods, right? Black churches start in the brush harbor. Yeah. And it's in the brush harbor, outside of the gaze of whiteness, in the brush harbor, after, weeks on the auction block, after weeks of children and husbands being sold up and down the river, after weeks of picking tobacco, chopping sugar, picking cotton. Yeah. The one time that they could have a level of rest would be on Sunday, but they would spend that time in the middle of the night to run to the brush harbor, to run to the clearing, and there they were able to learn a story of their deservedness, a story of their somebodyness, a story about how they really are the children of God. And if we take brush harbor spirituality seriously, I think that gives us an opportunity for us to not perpetuate plantation religion, but for us to really harvest the genius, the power of the brush harbor, where Black folk were able to take scripture and tell themselves a new story about themselves. So the storytellers today are the preachers. Yeah. The storytellers today are the grandmas, the grandpas, the mothers of the church, right? But not only, right? There's a story that younger generations have to tell about who they are as well. And even thinking about the ways that we use social media to tell our stories, not our individual stories per se, but to tell our stories as peoples, to tell our stories as a group of folk who have a very unique experience and relationship to the American experiment with democracy that is transformative, that is powerful, that is liberating, and actually it serves as a corrective to the real story of America.
Yeah. I think that's a great point and an amazing point. And even though I could ask you a million questions about this sermon, but I don't want this to be a sermon talk back today. We do want to cover some other things,
Sure.
although I know you're familiar with that concept of sermon talk back.
You were quite grueling in sermon talk back when we were in college, I remember.
Yes, I know. But you mentioned something about the black church withstanding or preventing itself from just kind of usurping this American branded religious tradition, right? To actually call on what it means to be Afrocentric in all that we do, or Afrocentric in all that we do. And so thinking about the convention, the Baptist Convention of DC and Vicinity's overarching theme of better together, right? We're better together. I'm wondering what does that mean to you as we look at the church today? What does it mean to be better together?
Yeah, I love the question, and I'm gonna take a Sankofa privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna look backwards as a way of looking forward in saying this. One is that I think that the theme is apropos, right? And so I celebrate the theme of the convention primarily because we live in a time of naked individualism, and rugged competition, that we often don't find ourselves embracing and harvesting the gift of solidarity, right? The gift of mutuality, the gift of pooling ourselves, pooling our resources together. Obviously, the story of Jesus is the most important story that churches tell. I think that's important to name. But the greatest part about Black church has always been its collectivist mentality. I talked about Brush Arbor spirituality, but what succeeds Brush Arbor spirituality is Reconstruction Church, right? Before Black people, after they were emancipated, before they built individual homes, they built Black church buildings, right? And these Black church buildings became meeting houses, schoolhouses. Obviously, these are the worship spaces, right? So there's something about the collective economics of the Black church that needs to be revived, right? One of our distant mentors, one that we did not get a chance to know, Benjamin Elijah Mays, has this ethic of collaboration and this ethic of collaboration and merging, right? That the sense that churches are better when they have a collaborative posture and when they have a sort of an ethic of merging, right? To pooling our resources together. I think the brilliance of the Reconstruction Black church, and remember, the Reconstruction Black church, right, gives us Black colleges. It gives us Black doctors and lawyers, Black hospitals. It gives us Black business, Black banks, right? So when we talk about Black Reconstruction, the Black Reconstruction, and we talk about the economics of Black Reconstruction, you can't tell that story without telling the story of Black churches. And so there's a part of what we must reclaim that our ancestors, maybe they intuited or something that they understood as a result of their own survival instinct, was a sense of that the true power of reshaping democracy and the true power of saving a group of people who've lived on the underside of whiteness and the underside of capitalism needs to be a church that says, you know, we have different names, we may have different buildings, but we learn how to pool our resources together for the forward progression of people. And I wonder, here in the shadow of the Capitol, right? What will it mean? What can it mean for the pooling of resources for mental health services, the pooling of resources for Black churches for learning loss? We've lost 2 years of school, no matter how we want to think about it. And the numbers are staggering that, our children have lost a lot of what they would have gained, right? So learning loss is a way that we need to think about addressing, something we need to think about addressing through our collective resources. And so this is a particular moment that I think we have where this theme can help us to revive the power of the Reconstruction Black Church, which I always saw as a revival of Acts 2 economics, right? It is Pentecost economics that you find in Acts 2, Acts 4, where churches pool everything. The Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit is not just about the ecstatic experience or even learning to hear one another in our own language, which we know Acts 2 is about. There's a new economic arrangement that comes out of Acts 2 where everybody has all things in common. And that may sound extreme and too far flung at this moment, but collective economics in the form of Black Christianity, Afri-Christianity, I think is a hearkening back to that Acts 2 experience of how there was no need because everybody pulled resources together. We can come together and figure out what those topics are. We can have these conversations across our across our churches, and figure out how we can come up with projects that the convention owns, which I know is not foreign to DC conventions. Have projects that these collection of churches can own that really begin to have a material and psychic improvement on the people who live here.
Yeah, and speaking of that, one of the things that made those churches so strong during the Reconstruction was the fact that they lived by that principle of, hey, if you got it, I got it. If I got it, you got it. We're going to build this thing, grow this thing together. That's how our Black colleges were built and all of that, as you said. And so in this season, I'm wondering, you're co-chair of the Social Justice Commission for the Progressive National Baptist Convention Incorporated. Sure. And so in that capacity, when you think about this idea of collective empowerment and collective economics and how it relates to our church's footprint on the ground and our church's imprint in people's lives and communities' lives, where are we? I know you have an important event coming up here on the Hill, so perhaps you can kind of tie that together with this. But where are we, and how do you see our denominational life sort of giving a fresh wind to the local church in this regard?
No, I think this is a powerful question. One, and I appreciate you framing it in the context of the Progressive National Baptist Convention as a way of thinking about the political viability of a denomination. PNBC, the denominational home of Martin Luther King Jr., the denominational home of Prathia Hall, the denominational home of Otis Marsh Jr., the denominational home of Bill Jones, right? The denominational home of Gardner Taylor, right? These are leaders, both male and female. These are leaders who understood, who had a theory of change that included Black congregations, right? Understood how to harvest the power of the Black pulpit. For whatever we want to say about Black churches getting smaller, whatever we want to say about the conventions losing their relevancy, the reality is nothing has replaced it.
No, not at all.
And so even as we raise the questions about, well, our conventions are smaller, that may be true, but so is everything else, right? And so nothing has actually replaced the political viability, the political potential of conventions, right? Now, the question is, are we the best stewards of that political power, of that political viability? I think that's a different question. But is there something inherent in these organizations that can move Black life forward? Yes. Yes, right? You don't have the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68 without the Progressive National Baptist Convention being on the front line of civil rights engagement, right? You just don't have that. And that is a legacy that I believe belongs to all black churches, right? I often, Raphael Warnock talks about the divided mind of the black church. Senator Warnock, excuse me, talks about the divided mind of the black church as he tells the story that the origins of the black church is a kind of the black churches grow out of an evangelical pietism, but also grows out of a radical protest tradition. And so both evangelical piety and radical protest are the heritages of black churches. Now is a time that we have to figure out how do we lean more into our radical protest tradition and not our overly evangelical pietism. We have to make that case because there is a problem in this nation where what it means to be Christian has been monopolized and co-opted by white evangelicalism, right? And a question that we have to ask that Harry Emerson Fosdick asked in the 1920s, shall the fundamentalists win? I think we have to start asking ourselves in this time, shall the evangelicals win? Right? Because there is a need, and not evangelicalism in its theological undercurrents, but as a political ideology, as a political bloc that only has a handful of priorities, and both of those priorities serve whiteness and don't serve real democracy. So I think the brilliance of black faith folk and what I like to call us as democracy first responders. That's what black church folk are. Democracy first responders. When democracy flatlines, it has always been the black church to emerge as its redirector, as the one who pushes it beyond its own rabid contradictions, right? And I think that's important to say. So right now, I think there's a moment where we have to figure out what is a black church legislative agenda, right? What are the big issue areas that we can agree on? And how do we invest all of our political capital as individual pastors, as denominational leaders, as congregations, coming up with this agenda, a shared agenda, and that we put our political power behind it, right? I think all of us say we want to end mass incarceration. Well, that's an area that we know we agree. I think all of us say we need to improve public education, right? I think that's an area where we say we can agree. None of us want to continue to see mental health to see the abandonment of people in mental health crises. None of us want to see that. Investing more, calling for legislation that invests more money into mental health care in underserved or abandoned, divested communities is something we can agree on. So I'm just naming things, but I think what has to happen is that we need our convention leaders on the national level. We need our state Baptist leaders on the state level. We need local leaders like here in DC and Vicinity that can come up with a legislative agenda. And here's what we do. Is that we do not offer endorsement or support for other people's agenda, right, until they endorse our agenda. One of the things that I've always been concerned about is the way politicians believe they can rent our collars and rent our robes, right? And what do I mean by renting our collar, renting our robes? Is that they come to us asking us, can we support their agenda, politicians, and we never actually say, well, maybe we can get on board with that, but where are you on this, right? If there was a unified, consensual, black faith agenda, that we would say, no, brother congressman, no, sister congresswoman, you cannot have our support on this until you show some robust support for this, right? I'm really overhearing politicians saying they love our children, they respect our communities, tired of politicians giving us lip service. We actually need politicians to practice public love, right? Public love, Cornel West says, public policy is what love looks like in public, right? Public policy is what love looks like in public. Well, we need to start telling our politicians, love us through your pen and love us through your vote. This is no longer the time for lip service, but we need to have our own agenda, right? That is agreed upon enough that we put our political power behind as national denominational leaders, state denominational leaders, local pastors, and we're able to start to now evangelize politicians to our agenda instead of allowing them to evangelize us to their agenda.
Yeah. That's a vitally important point, and something that we talk about often as far as just this whole process of conventions really being about setting an agenda, right? That we can get back to, pastors being able to walk into a room of politicians, of business people, of bankers, whomever, and claim a certain modicum of respect just from the mere fact that they know that the pastor's representing a major constituency and a powerful constituency. And it's something that I think is so vitally important, and it's important for our denominations to give us the tools as local churches, as local pastors, to handle those things.
If I could say, just this is an anecdote. One of my mentors, the Rev Dr Virgil Wood, who is a 91-year-old. He'll be 91 in a few days. He's a 91 civil rights veteran. He worked with Dr. King and actually organized the entire state of Virginia for the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So Dr. Wood is an incredible person, still spry, still lucid, still fighting the fight, right? Dr. Wood, and I don't know, I say this for shock value and not necessarily a whole endorsement, but Dr. Wood says that Negro preachers built in 50 years what black preachers have torn down the last 50 years, right? He's saying that fresh out of slavery, you have these Negro preachers, right, who are building schools, building businesses, building a democracy that works, building toward the building movements against lynching, right? In addition to Ida B. Wells Barnett, right? Supporting Ida B. Wells Barnett, and want to name her as the central person who had an anti-lynching policy, right? You have these Negro preachers, right? Who are building a black economy, building a black education system, building black churches that he says now that you have these black pastors, most of them megachurch pastors, who are tearing down all of those gains, right? Because they become too American. At some point, we have to ask the question: is a part of the church having what I think Dr. Freddie Haynes calls political laryngitis? We no longer have a voice, right? Or what Walter Fluker says is a socio-political narcolepsy. The church is violently asleep. I wonder if that is connected to the sedation of assimilation. Right. To what extent have we become too American to make America actually be America?
Right. And that therein lies the problem. That we worship an American Jesus. We praise an American God. Because yes, we want to speak truth to power, but at the same time, we don't want to lose our comforts and our privileges that we have gained, our certain modicum of comfort that we have gained. So it's interesting that all of this is kind of coming together. And I think one of the things that it kind of leads me to and makes me think about is, what are the tips, moving from like a macro to a micro level? What are the tips that, say, a local pastor in Southeast DC or in Southern Maryland or something can use to begin forging partnerships that work with, yes, other churches, but also, like you mentioned, mental health? How can pastors help remove the stigma to actually serve our people? We talk about economic disparities. How can pastors work with our financial institutions and work with those financial, I call them financial gurus, who can be financial planners or estate planners, whatever they are, to help our people on the ground? Because at the end of the day, if we as pastors can't do that, the question becomes, what are we doing? Sure. So say something about that. What are your thoughts on those?
I think a great genesis for this kind of work is to actually sort of elevate our contextual intelligence. We have to exegete our communities just as significantly as we exegete texts. How do we do that? I think one way of raising contextual intelligence, raising an awareness of where we are, is to actually survey the community. Digitally, I think is a good way to do that. Facebook will allow you to target posts to people who live in a certain geography, right? We could use technology, and we could use the traditional door-by-door surveying process, paper process, to actually hear what does the community say it needs, right? So often we like to map our desires and passions, what we want to do, onto what the community needs. But maybe the starting point should actually be, what are the people saying? There's a reason why in Ezekiel chapter 3, God picks up Ezekiel, drops him down by the riverside, and he doesn't say a word for 7 days. He just watches the people, sits among the people, listens to the people, and then the word of the Lord comes. That is important for social justice work, right? That is important for community development work, is that one, you begin to ask the people where they see the needs, and not just asking our congregations, because I don't know how it is in DC, but most of our congregations in many other parts of the country are commuter congregations. People don't live in the immediate neighborhood where the church sits. So surveying the congregation is one part, but surveying the actual community around the congregation to figure out what kind of public work would you like to see this congregation engage in? That's one. The other piece is to approach community development from an asset-based approach, right? Don't start with the problem, start with the assets. Figure out what are the assets that are in your congregation, in your community, particularly the people assets, right? And I say starting with that asset development approach because, one, it allows you to sort of harvest the wisdom of the people who are on the team, right? There are people in the congregation who know organizations that would be good partners for handling food insecurity. People in the congregation know organizations that could be helpful for mental health engagement. There are people in the congregation who can connect us to PTAs and PTOs in ways that pastors may not necessarily have a hand on. So starting these partnerships has to start with contextual intelligence. Another piece is, I think, after we get that list of what the community says it needs, is that we spend some days in prayer and discernment. That as a congregation, we pray on which of these issues does God want us to attack now, right? You cannot do everything, but you are required to do something. And that's real. And I think one of our dangers is that, no, we cannot do single issues because none of us live single issue lives. I get that, right? But we also cannot do everything. And part of the danger of Black Faith Life is that we have become that catch-all organization for everyone. So discernment allows us to narrow our focus a bit so that we can actually tackle something robustly, effectively, efficiently. The other piece is that we actually begin to ask ourselves and create strategic plans on how to get it done, right? We actually come up with strategic plans. So much of what we do, because we live in communities in crisis, so much of what we do as churches is reactionary, right? We're responding to the latest police killing. We're responding to the latest mishap at school, the latest atrocity at school. We're responding to the latest political crisis. We're responding to the latest family who's lost a loved one, and it doesn't give us time to strategically plan. And so in addition to all the ambulatory work that we have to do as pastors, as local leaders, is we also need a strategic plan on how we intend to abolish a particular system. And so the last piece is, I would say, is next to the last piece is we need a theology of abolition. Let's stop settling for reform, and let's say, as people of faith, we are going to end mental health apartheid. We're going to end food apartheid. We're going to end education apartheid, right? It's that the capacity to have revolutionary patience, where we're able to tell ourselves, no, we understand that this will take time, but we're going to fight every single day like we believe it can be gone tomorrow. a theology of abolition is going to be important. Let's prepare to abolish systems. And then out of that strategic plan, we start to build those partnerships because we put that plan on paper.
Now you speak my language. We put that plan on paper.
Is your language.
That is the important part, to put it on paper. Long gone is the day that we can be solely an oral people.
Yeah.
We have to put these things on paper in order to really help push it to get to where it needs to be. Habakkuk, write the vision, make it plain. There's a reason that we write it. There's a reason that we put it down. And I think it's so vitally important in this season for us to do just that, to gain these strategic partnerships. So just one thing really, in light of everything that's going on, right? There's so much going on. I don't even want to begin naming it, but we got this conflict in Ukraine happening. We got, of course, this pandemic that hopefully is shifting to an endemic. We still have the issues with the police. We still got issues in our schools, issues with mask mandates and folk tripping about that, critical race thing. I mean, you go down the line, there are issues all around us. What word or words of encouragement do you have for the pastors and the people in this season? What is that?
I still believe that black churches are the conscience of this nation. Right? As Dr. King says, we're not supposed to be the puppet of the state or the servant of the state. We're supposed to be the conscience of the state. And I believe when we lean into that frame, we are able to develop a political imagination, a theological courage that says our electeds on all levels need to hear from us, right? Why? Because black faith has something to say to poverty. Black faith has something to say to international war. Black faith has something to say to sexism, right? Black faith has something to say. And so my word of hope for us is that it's a downbeat hope, right? It's a blues hope, right? It's the kind of hope that's able to name the jagged edges of our existence and then transcend them, right? I know that's from your canon, right? The canon that we have is that we tell ourselves that we are the hope. And we believe it, right? Is that the church as the conscience of the nation that is not simply concerned only with souls, but concerned with bodies. And when we understand that we are concerned with bodies, we remind ourselves that maybe Zion can't do it on its own, but if Zion is connected to 19th, and if 19th is connected to Shiloh, there's the collective power that we bring to the moment. So reminding ourselves that we actually come from sturdy stock of people who've changed this nation before, of people who've had something to say to international issues, and we can do it again. We can do it again. And I think that the last piece I want to say about this is that we also have to learn how to think intersectionally. Church has been good, black church has been good on issues of race, and we've not been so good on issues of class. We've not been so good of issues of patriarchy, and I'll just stop with those two so that we don't polarize the conversation. But there are a whole lot of other isms that we haven't been good at attacking. And so I think if we learn how to think intersectionally and organize intersectionally, then we understand that it's the church's job to fight racism and sexism and classism, right? It's that the church has an opportunity, has a sacred obligation to do this work of speaking to what is happening domestically and also what is happening internationally. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't name that even as we look at this international crisis, right? What's happening in Ukraine matters here. Yeah. Yeah. Bombs that drop there explode at our gas pump. Yeah. Right? Inflation that we're seeing now is a result of this international conflict that's happening. We live in a world house. right? A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? To use Dr. King's language again. And so thinking intersectionally also means thinking globally. Is that we have to be able to say in the same voice that America is the greatest purveyor of violence. Ukraine does not deserve to be invaded, exploited, and dominated by Russia. And Ukraine must learn how to treat its black residents, particularly its African foreign exchange students, right? We have to be able to name all of those things in tandem. And so when we have a church that understands that it is the hope of the world and it is committed to intersectional justice, then we are able to say that the kingdom of God can be made manifest here on earth.
Agreed. That's so vitally important. And that intersectionality piece, right, is just essential, I believe, because when we look at it, that's who Jesus is. Yeah. Jesus is an intersectional individual. Yeah. Everywhere he walked, he was intersecting with different experiences, sure, different walks of lives, and made each intersection better, yeah, than it was when he showed up. Yeah. It's a major mandate, but I think it's one that definitely provides hope for us and is one that we all have to be mindful of. So I certainly want to thank you for taking out the time to be with the Baptist Convention of DC and Vicinity. I thank you as my younger Morehouse brother. You know, it's always good to see how God is really working in your life and the great things that you're doing in New Jersey there at the Mount Pleasant Church and the other things you're doing as well. We're just certainly grateful to God. I'm grateful to God for what God is doing in your life. And so if there are any last sort of words you have, certainly share those with us at Hits.
Thank you, Dr. Baxter. It's been a gift to have this conversation, but it's really been a gift to do life with you, man, to learn from you over these years, and to know that, you know, what was invested in us at Morehouse is what we try to bring to this work. So, you know, shameless plug for Morehouse College. I know there are many Morehouse pastors in DC and Vicinity, so shout out to the house. But we are at a very crucial moment where life is just more fragile than I ever expected life to be. And if the churches are going to be really manifestations of the movement of Jesus, then we really have to have a stubborn commitment to saving souls and saving bodies. Yeah. Saving souls and saving minds, saving souls and saving lives, because if the black church is not doing it, it won't get done.
Wow. Thank you for that. So just thank you again. This has been great, and this has been a great town hall, I believe, and so we certainly just want to thank all of you who have joined us, all of those who have shared this day, both at the Ministers Conference and now this evening during this session. And my prayer is that something has been said, you've heard something that's blessed you immeasurably, and we look forward to further dialogue through, whether it's through Q&A or simply through reaching out. Pastor Willie Francois is a reachable pastor. So you certainly can find him on social media. You can find him through his church, whatever, and reach out to him. He is definitely one that enjoys conversing with those who want to have a meaningful conversation. And so God bless each and every one of you for sharing with us today. And thank you once again to President Keith William Byrd Sr. for setting this up. And we look forward to the great work that the Baptist Convention of DC and Vicinity will continue to do in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. God bless you.